Welcome everyone to Already Cancelled. I am Peter, that is Connor, and we are going to talk about Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 5, Episode 17. It's called The Outcast. So full spoilers for the episode, as always. It's a very forward-thinking episode. It's an episode which I could sort of sense from the start, just given the premise, which is there's this alien race that doesn't have gender, and Riker is going to kind of fall for one of them, and they're going to fall back. You got this relationship brewing. It kind of felt like, okay, this is clearly going to be tackling certain subjects. It's going to be a little ahead of its time, given like how little this subject is tackled in this time period. But it actually impressed me because the more it went along, the more relevant and specific it got. Like, it actually went further than I thought it was going to with its subject. And I was very impressed with that. Admittedly, I'm not sure how much of this is specifically talking about the idea of being trans or non-binary, and if it's maybe just more directly referencing the idea of being gay. But regardless, it still functions entirely for that subject.
There were elements of it that felt like it was reacting to, specific, like conversion therapy, for example.
Yes. That
felt, particular to that. But then, again, there were things that was like, oh no, this is very specific to the trans experience, right? It felt like it was kind of hitting at both.
Yeah, I would say it definitely veers far more towards the trans experience, or just anything where you realize you're not what's expected, right? Just anything that falls into that sort of category. But like any interest in science fiction, it's actually a very classic. Very broadly speaking, it's a very classic trope that it uses, which is that it inverses the thing. So in this case, it's a society where everyone does not have a gender, and you're seen as being weird for thinking you're a man or a woman. And obviously, it's easy to translate that to like the real world, because it's like we expect most people to be men or women, and then the reaction that this society has is a bit more akin to someone who reacts negatively to someone who sees themselves as the opposite gender, or doesn't conform to just the traditional gender like spectrum. So it's actually quite smart in how it's doing that. And to be honest, once it got to the point where the character of Soren, who's the character who, what's funny is that she corrects Riker early on when he says she, but ultimately that's actually correct given what we learn about her later in the episode. Like, when she actually starts talking about feeling different and realizing she was different from everyone else and like conversion therapy, and she starts giving this speech, I was like, damn, this is going way further into this than I ever thought it was going to. I thought, oh, it'll broach the subject, it'll make some interesting points, it'll maybe dance around it a little bit. Not because I felt it was going to have kid gloves, but just because of like how far maybe they were allowed to or willing to go in the time period in the 80s. Well, not the 80s, it's the 90s by this point, but the show started in the 80s. So actually,
what is, for all intents and purposes, network TV?
Yeah, for all intents and purposes. I know,
for a weird quirk, it's technically not, but it essentially is network TV.
Yeah, actually, Tara gave me a bit of trivia on this episode. Jonathan Frakes wanted a man to play the part of Soren, and the producers said no. But
okay,
I can see the argument for that. Maybe to like just give it a little bit of a, because the actor is clearly a woman, and you can see that like the entire time. It's not something that they've. Whereas I feel like the modern shows would probably like try and make it as androgynous as possible to make so that we don't recognize one or the other more so.
It's very much female presenting. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, Riker's going to hit on them. Like that's what Riker does.
Yeah, I think that's actually making a lot more light of it than I think this episode ever does, though, bizarrely.
No, I know, but I think
this episode never ever treats this as Riker's just got another flirtatious moment.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't, to be fair. What I meant is there's an expectation of that because you've cast a woman in the role, right? And like I say, you're being female presenting, and this is Riker. I think if you'd had it been a man in the role and not had it as clear cut for Riker, I guess it would have been more interesting.
Yeah, although I mean, I'm just assuming the producers said no because we're not having you kissing an actor on TV. Like, I'm assuming that was the argument. If the argument was instead, well, no, because this character ultimately is going to identify as a woman, so therefore it should be a woman playing the part. I could at least see the reasoning there for that. But I'm assuming it was probably more of a shitty like standards of the time thing rather than like a nuanced debate that was happening.
I would assume so. Yeah.
Just to think the worst of the Hollywood system and whatnot, but. So the fact that it tackles all these things is super interesting, and that's not to say that the episode does not have lighter moments. There's a couple of lines in this that actually made me laugh out loud properly. I don't think I'll ever not hear the sentence, "Commander, can we discuss your sexual organs?" just out the blue like that and not chuckle a little bit to myself.
I mean, how often are you expecting to hear that out of the blue?
I doubt I'll ever will hear it again, unless someone intentionally throws it in as a reference, but it cracked me up. Even earlier on when Sauron asked Riker, what type of woman are you attracted to? Like, my joke response in my head was like, oh, how long have you got? Like, the list is endless. So there's definitely some lighter moments, there's some jokey moments in the discussing, because that's the thing that the episode presents them with like a solution, like a problem to solve, right? It gives them there's a shuttles went missing and it turns out to be this little almost Bermuda Triangle-esque thing in space, but there's a scientific reason for it and they're going to go in, they call it null space, but that's all just background. The episode's about them to interact, and it's about these two characters falling for each other, learning about each other.
Plot kind of ends quite quickly, relatively speaking, for the runtime of the episode.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say it ends quickly, but it ends early. It ends about 2/3 through, and so it's very clear that the important part of the episode is very much these two and what the fallout of their getting close is going to be. And so super interesting stuff.
With a very interesting ending as well, I would say. Again, not doing the TV happy ending stuff that this show has tended to avoid, not more necessarily more often than not, but when it has to.
This is, I actually think what's so fascinating about the ending to me is that it almost felt like it might kind of do it. It almost felt like it was teasing. So I have to kind of set this up here. So ultimately, when other characters from her race find out what's going on, they arrest her, and it's like, well, you're going to get conversion therapy, you're going to be cured, you're going to have this out your mind, and you're going to see the light and whatever. And they call it like psychotactic treatment, so they're different from anything we've ever specifically had on Earth, but
the point's the same.
Yeah, you assume it's maybe even more effective, because when we see her at the end, she is like completely brainwashed effectively. It's like Clockwork Orange style by the sounds of it. But like Riker, upon hearing this, tries to speak up for her, but ultimately, and this is kind of a nuanced point as well, ultimately Sauron says, you know what, I'm sick of lying, I'm sick of hiding, this is who I am. That felt very true to life. It felt very true to the idea of coming out and being prideful, and in a much harder circumstance, and hopefully most people ever have to suffer through. But ultimately it's like, well, therapy it is, psycho tactics, off you go, right? That's time. And Riker's going to kick up a fuss, and Picard's like, look, we can't intervene, this is their own laws, this is their own politics, this is, if we intervene, this is the most simple, clear-cut case of breaking the Prime Directive we'll have ever done.
More explicit than that, it's not if we intervene, it's if you intervene. Because Picard's basically saying, I'm not going to stop you, but I'm not going to be able to do anything for you if you go and do it.
Well, yeah, it gets to that point, but it starts off very much, we can't intervene. Like, that's how it starts. It starts off with saying, we can't get involved with this, which is what I was meaning. And then it kind of becomes, like, don't throw away your career by doing something stupid. And Riker never agrees not to do anything. He just says, can I be dismissed? And Picard just has to accept that Riker's going to make this choice, one way or the other.
Yep.
And Worf, interestingly, we'll get back to another Worf scene later, actually, because there's some interesting stuff about all the plot leading up to all this, obviously, but you brought up the ending, so we're doing it. And Worf comes in and says, you're planning to go down there, aren't you? You're going to go down there and cause a ruckus. I'll come with you. Now, you can order me not to, because you're my superior officer, and I'll accept that order, but we're friends. And I love how, like, just an episode or two after the Worf, like, sees Riker as his best friend and, like, wants him to help commit suicide, we're doing more stuff where Worf is like, we're best friends, I will come with you, because we're warriors together, brothers in arms, this kind of thing.
I got your back, buddy.
Yeah. But Riker agrees, and they go down, stealthily. They're in the bushes, and they're ready to strike. And I was thinking during this part, I'm like, oh, this is actually almost like super unconventional that they might actually rescue her and bring her back, and it'll be a relatively happy ending, even though they've kind of like fudged some diplomacy a little bit by doing it this way. And I was actually, even though I wouldn't have hated that necessarily, because it's still kind of like Riker making the choice to do that is a big deal, and I think the consequences and just the character implications would have been interesting anyway.
And also they did say that they can kind of like, they'll do it as claiming asylum, so there was a loophole that theoretically, like, okay, we could have got out of it before it was too bad.
I was pleasantly surprised that we have this darker ending where it's too late, the therapy's already kicked in, and Soren says, go away, I'm not this, like, I was sick and now I'm cured. And Riker even tries to say I love you to sort of like snap her out of it, basically, and she's like, I'm sorry, and just walks away. And it ends in this really dour note where Riker walks back onto the bridge in uniform, and Picard says, oh, I've got these new orders, but, you know, are we done here, Commander Riker? And he just says, yep, we're done here. And
I like though that Picard was going to be willing to kind of just like, all right, well,
stick around, yeah.
The orders can wait. You know, we'll wait around for Riker on this one.
There's a grey area here that Picard was trying to like skirt the line on as much as he could to give him a chance.
He's like, I can't directly help you, but I can, you know, say we got delayed.
So I like this ending quite a bit because it is just a sad end, and ultimately there's nothing he can do after this point. There's nothing to achieve. He can't claim injustice because it's their system, it's their politics. There's no one to rescue in a sense anymore. So it's just this really kind of sad ending where there's no solution, and it's honestly it's another example of this show doing not the easy happy ending, and it almost felt like it was going to do the heroic, like I'm going to break the rules and like save her anyway. And the fact that it teased that and then gave him the harsh reality of, no, this world is this way and there's nothing you can do about it, was a lot more poignant, I thought.
Oh, absolutely. And a credit to the episode, it went in so fast that when he did, you know, it wasn't until he walked in onto the bridge after that scene that I was like, oh, this is the ending. I still thought I had more time left in the episode for it. Oh, there'll be another attempt. There'll be something else to try and, you know, get her back. But it's like, no, that was it.
Yeah, it's a super that's a bit of a gut punch of an ending, and I like that Riker still made the choice to potentially nuke his entire Starfleet career. You know, if he got caught doing this in any number of ways, it might have been the end of his Starfleet time, and he was willing to risk all that. Cause, now, admittedly, if there's any critique I'd have is that they've not actually known each other that long, and like how much does he actually care about her at this point? But that's just typical TV, like rushing the romance
even
stuff.
More typical so on Trek as well, right?
Yeah.
Of the we're in love after how many times has Riker been in love at this point? For one episode. I feel like it's in the double digits.
He's in love with love. What can one say? So, you know, I mean, you can throw that sort of general critique at it, and I think that's a fair point because, you know, we've had these problems for, you know, tons of times.
I will say they went out of their way to kind of sell this one a little bit more than usual, in that he went to see Troy and was like, hey, you know, this is a thing. That doesn't usually happen in Riker relationship episodes.
No, it doesn't. It felt a bit more real after that, which was nice. It also sold, I think, the idea that he can't just openly flaunt or talk about this one as much. But the idea that he came to Troy and because I was expected to be more this complicated thing because of who she is and her people. But it actually did kind of feel a little bit more like, hey, this might be getting serious, and like we've got this thing, like this sort of
it
on off again.
Are you okay with this?
Yeah, you okay with this? This might actually end up being permanent, and that might, because, you know, they're so on and off again, and like sort of accepting of that, you know, and, you know, knowing future Trek, I know that they do eventually end up like married and whatnot, but I think it's interesting.
That was the moment that kind of sold it as much as this show is ever going to be able to sell one, you know, a romance being serious in one episode, because I don't think it's not fair for really any TV show, to be honest. To kind of really do that, it's hard, right, to get to that level in one episode. But if there's going to be a way to do it at this point in the show, it's moments like that of Riker going to Troy and going like, hey, this is different.
It's not impossible by any means, but it is difficult. in the context of a relatively procedural show to do it. If you have a show where you can devote an episode and the episode is just the story and it can have time jumps perhaps and it can have like montages and like you can do it like I mean, put it this way, like there's many a movie that convinces you of a romance, and I would argue that most movies that succeed in it before like the halfway mark, because you have to care for the rest of the plot. So
no, that's fair, and that's what I'm saying. It can be done, but in traditional TV format, like I said, unless you're being inventive and kind of doing something different, it's hard.
Absolutely.
And also, I think with a movie, in a lot of cases, it's easier because you don't know either character going in. Whereas in a TV show, especially we've had 5 odd seasons with Riker, we know what right, and then here's a random character this week. Have fun. They're in love now, and it's like, okay, am I going to believe this? Whereas in a movie, you don't know either going in. It's
the typical format of a TV show where one character is a regular and one's a new person that you inherently don't expect a new person to stick around. Once in a while, you get surprised, but generally speaking, not so much. So. Yeah, so I mean that is basically the only real critique I have of it, because everything else, like their early conversations are kind of very naturally awkward, I thought, in a way where the conversations was coming up, it was kind of like skirting towards chemistry, but without either one letting it kind of feel that way. And it's the scene where they sit down to have the soup, and that's where the conversation where Soren just starts asking questions like, I don't understand your like. Your race with these genders, like it's weird because you think it's weird that we don't have genders, but I think it's weird that you do. So, and obviously the hindsight of knowing that she does actually kind of feel more inclined to one than the other definitely paints it with a different brush. Like it's just almost like she's given the more propaganda like messaging in this scene. But
that and the questions feel like more of confirmation bias of her wanting to confirm these things are similar across species, all these feelings, that makes sense. Okay, if I'm feeling these, I am more female.
Yeah. I mean, there's also just the sense that there's little moments that slip through, like, when she does ask, what do you find attractive in a woman he describes, and he ends it with, and they have to laugh at my jokes, and then she laughs, and it's the first time we kind of see her. I mean, that's maybe not the first time she smiles at all, but it's like the first proper big smile. And it kind of comes across that there's like a barrier being broken through here a little bit. And she's like, well, is that what everyone finds attractive? And he's like, oh, no. Like, there's some people like this, some people like that, blah, blah, blah. And I think the one question that I really liked was like, okay, so there's physical differences, but like, what about like emotions and things like that, and attitude? Like, are those different? And he's like, many believe so, but that's a really hard question to answer, and I don't think we've got time to really delve into that. The eternal discussion and debate that rages on.
Not a satisfying answer for her though, is it? Because she has to ask Crusher the same thing basically.
And she thinks she gets a definitive thing from Crusher when she's been checked out. And Crusher, she's like, oh well, you have longer hair typically, you present it in a more glamorous fashion, you put on makeup. I mean, she doesn't say that. The phrasing, I'm just sort of summarizing.
Colours on your body, I think is the way she says it.
I'm summarizing for time, but you've stopped to explain it anyway, so I guess
because it was amusing.
Nothing's been solved by my attempt. So, but no, and she's like, okay, so it's the women's job to attract the men, and she's like, oh no, I wouldn't necessarily say that. Like, men care a lot about attracting women. It's just that their method typically is to pretend they don't care and do nothing. And I'm like, this is that's just striking a chord here. I feel attacked. I feel attacked by this scene. But it's very broad strokes, but it's like, okay, but this is someone who doesn't understand any of this, so she has to get the broad strokes. And clearly she doesn't understand, because one of the things that I really liked about the scene where she comes out to Riker, if you will, about, some of us are born feeling like we're more male or female, even though society doesn't deem that appropriate, and mentions that she has had relationships with people who identify as men. So they do find each other. They find each other, and this is like a sort of underground thing, which again feels very pulled out of history. Feels like the sort of thing that
they've got WhatsApp groups.
Yes, sure. So yeah, I thought that was another funny scene, was like Crusher trying to explain this, which led to another amusing scene I thought with the poker game. With some characters who don't have a lot of time in this episode, but I thought Worf putting his foot in it a little bit and sounding a little old-fashioned, but it goes with the Klingon values, of course. The way he sees men as men and women as women. But he calls the game they're playing as a women's game because it has too many wild cards, and men don't need weird rules and advantages to make it work. Like, women need these extra crutches or these wild cards, and I don't play poker, so I don't even really like. I get the broad concept, but it's all a bit opinionated for something I don't really know much about. But Crusher's like, hey, I was telling Sauron today that those views were long gone, but maybe I was mistaken, and sort of giving Worf the eye. And I can't. What was it that Data asks that Troy just sort of turns to Worf and goes, "Yes, Worf. What's the answer to that question?" And he just awkwardly sort of moves on and starts talking about the game again because he knows he's in trouble if he answers it properly. Yeah, it was something to do with the difference between men and women or something.
But
it was really funny though because Worf was just kind of realizing he'd stepped in it. It was like, I need to backtrack.
He's looking around at Troy and Crusher and being like, "Oops."
Yes, I may be a warrior, but these two will murder me. It was kind of what was that was the look in his eyes anyway. So
tread carefully.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think going into this episode and it tackling a topic like this, I think I'm impressed that it didn't get itself into as much trouble as I thought it might.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Especially, like, I know obviously this is give or take 30 years after the original series, but there were a lot of original series episodes that were well-meaning, but were like, yeah, it's not aged amazingly. I know this is, again, it's significantly closer, but this is still give or take 30 years ago.
Yeah,
right?
This is
like 25, something like that. I don't know when this episode was exactly.
No, I mean, I think it is. It's maybe 91, maybe 92, so it's right on that cusp, if not.
Around, roughly 30 years ago, so it's not recent. Society has moved a reasonable amount in 30 years. So it definitely has aged significantly better than most of the attempts from original series in that regard.
And even Next Gen in some ways, we've critiqued before that this show doesn't typically write good plots for the female characters, and it's like the writer's room, which I imagine is full of men, just don't really know how to do it properly. Which is funny because I think some of the speeches that Riker gives in this episode or Sauron gives in this episode are actually fairly well written and seem to have an understanding of the broad like ideals that Trek is supposed to be portraying. They just don't actually know how to write stories for the female characters to kind of make them feel equal to the male characters, which is a shame. But
it's why we've always considered, I think, those weaker elements of the show come from a place of ignorance, not malice.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair statement. But it's why I kind of left myself feeling, because there was a couple of moments when a question was, when Sauron would ask a question early on to either Riker or Crusher, where I almost perked up like, oh, I can't wait to hear what they say. Like, what did the writers put in this? Given their track record with writing female stories, I was a little like, oh, what's right? And then he gave his speech, and I'm like, you know what? That was actually a fairly understanding and diplomatic way of answering that question. That didn't feel like it was like stepping on any toes, or even the way, because when Riker early on with the pronouns, which obviously she turns out to be a she later when it becomes clear she does identify as a woman, but in that early scene when she's explaining that like the pronoun they have, like they don't have a word for, right? So Riker's struggling and he says, oh, forgive me if an accidental he or she slips in, but I'm not, like, I'm so used to like saying one or the other. That felt like a very kind of like just a genuine response. He wasn't being mean, he wasn't trying to dismiss what she was asking. It was just, oh, this is a bit of a struggle, but so forgive me if I let it go, but it's not intentional. It felt like his response was very like genuine, friendly. It was trying to be understanding, all these things. It felt like it had that
well intentioned.
Yeah, it felt like it had that attitude throughout the entire episode, in terms of the writing, and I think it left me feeling like, do you know what? I am very impressed that they were able to tackle the subject that this episode had, which was gender identity, in a way that used its science fiction, because I feel like there's probably a significant amount of the audience that if this episode, let's say they went to a planet, and instead of the inverse thing where, because this is the thing, this works for everyone who's watching it, because this is weird to everyone, right? The idea of a civilization that has no gender. So all of the people who might react adversely to an actual plot about a trans character or someone who's non-binary might actually, the message will go over their heads a little bit, but they'll actually be okay with this episode because, like, oh yeah, this is weird. This non-binary. This is so inhumane. Like, this is ridiculous. Maybe without getting the irony that, like, it's kind of trying to point something out to them, like, about how they view other people.
Sadly, there are too many of those people out there that watch Trek. Or,
for sure, yeah, absolutely.
The new season of Doctor Who just finished, and which shares a lot of similar ideals to Trek, right? My God, some of that fan base.
Oh yeah,
I'm like, how have you? And some of them are claiming, "Oh, I've watched it for 50 years." I'm like, how? How have you watched it for 50 years and still have these opinions? Are you sure you're watching it?
I mean, but the reason why I bring that up is, like, I don't even mean that from today's perspective. I'm saying specifically for this episode airing in the early 90s. I have to imagine that if they just told pardon the word, but a straight trans story, then it would have caused an upset and people would have not liked them tackling that subject. And maybe there was still an outcry at this because it was broaching the subject at all, but I feel like this probably went down a lot better just because they did this thing of inversing it so that it was more alien and therefore, but it still actually gets the point across.
Oh, definitely. It's kind of safer, right? In the sense of, okay, if you're paying even the slightest amount of attention, you understand it. And if you're not at all, somehow it goes over your head. It's just, oh, it's a sci-fi weird alien thing, right? It's kind of why sci-fi has done this for all of its history. Is it's safer and more palatable to any audience.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, like, anyone who gets to the end of this episode and thinks what's happened to Soren is wrong and thinks that this society should reevaluate how they're treating people like her, like, if that doesn't line up with your view in the real world, then maybe question yourself a little bit. And if your answer is, well, it's a made up alien race, it's not the same thing, it doesn't matter. Well, no, it doesn't matter. There's a reason why the story works. There's a reason why it resonates. So yeah, very impressed with this episode, and one that's definitely a quieter Trek episode. It's mostly just two characters talking in various different scenarios.
There's like no action at all.
No, obviously there's a scene where they go in and they rescue the little shuttle, and that's
even that's brief.
It's pretty brief. There's not much to it, but like, even that, it's mostly the conversation on their way in as opposed to the actual action of the sequence. Yeah. So like, but it's honestly, the rating on IMDb is a little bit lukewarm. It's not super low, but it's in 6.8. It's not like one of the higher rated ones either.
That's surprising. I'd have thought it would have been higher than that.
And I don't know if, like, maybe there's a bit of a intentional downvoting like sometimes you see with topics like this. It's possible. I also don't know if it's just a case of, like, maybe not enough people have, like, revisited this in the last few years and realized just how well it holds up and, like, how...
It could also be a case of, for a lot of people, as much as we've just said, oh, there's no action, it's a quieter episode, and we've enjoyed that, some people might be like, it got a bit boring because there was no action or anything there that made it less of a Trek episode for them, for what they like out of Trek.
Yeah, by next gen standards, because, like, if there's one problem I have with modern Trek is that it's all about the action.
Yeah.
It's all the action. Yeah, because I thought the dynamic between the characters was quite interesting because it didn't feel like traditionally romantic at first. It felt like this awkward kind of like, I guess the best thing to compare it to is a coming out story where, like, one character's not sure if the other one will accept who they are, so they're trying to, like, I think typically you see it where you'll have, like, two men or two women in a story, and one is, like, inching towards suggesting there might be a romantic connection between them, but not knowing if the other one is going to react in horror or, like, beyond just the typical, like, will the other person like me or not. There's that, like, will they, like, be offended at my existence as a human being, or in this case, whatever alien race they were. But so, like, I felt that. I think the fact that I felt that and can compare it to other stories of that type is, again, very impressive for what you said earlier is essentially a network TV show from the early 90s. Like, you imagine any other early 90s show, like, tackling this. And someone's going to give like I know like there's some other big shows from the early 90s that were very ahead of their time that I've not seen, and so I'm sure there's a couple that might have done, but
the
not
point
many.
is those shows are the minority.
Well, no, I think the point is that those are the ones who are remembered. Those are the ones that are
right,
still talked
you're remembering
about.
them, but they're the minority of all the shows that were on. Is what I'm saying. So, like, yes, there probably is a handful that people can list off in the comments and go, well, what about this, this, and this? It's like, sure, you can probably give me maybe at most 10 examples out of the hundreds of shows that were on.
Yeah, so I am very impressed with this episode.
Yeah, I thought it was very good.
I don't think it necessarily gets up there with some of the best episodes of Next Gen, but it tackles a very serious topic in a time where I did not expect the topic to be tackled and didn't. Like, I mean, maybe some people do find issues with some of it. Like, maybe there is like some elements that have like maybe contradict the general thinking now. Maybe there's some elements that, but nothing particularly stood out to me. Like, as it was discussing any of this.
No, and again, it's clear this, even if there are things that aren't perfect, it comes from a good place again. You know, it's trying very clearly. It's, anything that is wrong is either a case of, you know, things have moved on in the 30 years, or it was probably just ignorance at the time. It doesn't feel like there was anything malicious at all, if there was anything that was wrong.
Either, you know, a general ignorance, or in some cases just there wasn't a correct term for certain things yet, or there just wasn't, you know, like, because, you know, times have changed a little bit. We talk about this a bit more openly. So, very interesting. Or more specifically, I should say, at least for us, two people who are not in that world hear and talk about it a lot more openly. I'm sure people who were actually having those feelings were talking a lot about it in the early 90s, but
I'm sure they were.
But the rest of the world tended to not, and certainly for us, we were either a baby or not born yet. So
that is true.
There you go. Also, when did Jordan get a beard? That's
this episode is the answer, I believe. Because
I'm like, I don't think he had that last episode. I was like, he's got a beard there.
I don't think he did, no.
Did Riker slap a beard on him?
Maybe he's doing what Data did that time. It's been like, he's a good role model. Let's grow a beard.
I mean, honestly, it suits it well enough. I have no complaints about Geordie beard, but
see if it lasts.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see if it lasts. I feel like I've seen a photo of him with a beard, so maybe he has a beard for a while, but he definitely didn't have a beard before now, because I definitely stuck out to me when I saw him, because he's only in like one scene, so I was like, wait, is that a beard?
Yeah, he definitely hasn't had it. I don't remember it last episode, but he definitely hasn't had it long if he did.
Yeah. So, interesting. Also, Riker, I know Riker's always had a man spread, right? But like in this episode, because he was sitting like a park bench at one point, and Soren came and sat like at the other end of the bench, and she's got her legs sort of like, you know, pressed together, right? And she looks like a little mouse, just kind of like sitting all sort of hunched up, and he's sitting there with the legs like wide apart, and
I do wonder how much of that is Frakes' back.
It may, yeah.
Particular thing for him. Don't get me wrong, like it's not uncommon to see anyway.
Yeah, but I'm like, damn, he's got some. I mean, I have a bit of a man spread. Most of us do. That's why it's called a man spread, because men tend to.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend I don't.
But I don't sit there like you know, try to catch all the bowling pins when the ball comes in.
I was really wondering what you were going to go with then.
I don't know. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, his is extreme, and like I said, I do wonder if part of that is his back.
It may be. It may very well be. Also, the talk of the sexual organs, they do talk about the mating rituals, and at one point, Soren asks, like, "Do you think like a human in my race would be compatible sexually?" And he just sort of says, I'm not sure, but all I could think was what he really needs to ask is if they have something in particular. He just needs to ask, do you have this?
But he is clearly very uncomfortable with the topic, as is referenced later on when she just brings it up, and he is like, nope, it's fine.
Yeah, because he says, "Oh, it's very simple. The man inseminates the woman, and then the woman gives birth." And it's like, I feel like you're glossing over some key details in this, right? Because you've kind of summed it up in the most basic, like scientific, boring ways, and then he has the cheek, like 5 minutes later, to criticize like their method of like doing something to a
Seems
husk.
boring.
Right? It's like, yeah, it's not as fun as what we do. Wait, what's that? So sexual pleasure can be very pleasurable. Yes, it often is, Riker.
That's not entirely the point, but yeah.
Yeah, it was the way he said it. Like, some people find it enjoyable. Some.
Have you ever known Riker to be so coy?
I mean, I get it. He's nervous. I'm pointing out the dialogue, but it does a good job of like showing him like not on his usual confident footing that he normally has. Right? He's totally. Which again, maybe another good example of, along with the Troy scene, of showing that he maybe feels something more genuine here than just a chance of a one night stand.
It's not standard Riker flirting.
Yeah. So, and plus he might know it's like taboo or not allowed. He's not supposed to in this case. And maybe even for him it's a little bit different as well, because he's maybe feeling things, but it's maybe a little weird because, as pointed out, like at least up until a certain point, Soren is not a woman, and he is up until this point firmly been attracted to women. So maybe he's feeling a little confused by it himself. He's not really sure what he's supposed to feel. He's sorting through his own like reaction to this as well. So yeah, there's many aspects to it. So very interesting episode. I think there's a lot of good discussion points to be had on it, and I think it'll be one of the more memorable ones because it actually had some meat to it. There was a lot to think about.
Oh, definitely. It'll be one of those where some of these are pretty forgettable. Even the ones that can be maybe more technically enjoyable than this, but they're light and fluffy enjoyable. But so they're great at the time, but they're after a few weeks, few months, they kind of fade a little bit. This one will probably stick a bit firmer in the memory.
Yeah. All right, well, let's look ahead to next time then. And it looks like we got some tossed salads and scrambled eggs, because Fraser Crane is coming aboard the Enterprise.
What?
The foe is Kelsey Grammer. He's got a Starfleet uniform on.
Oh, okay.
Although notably, it looks like a Wrath of Khan era movie suit, so maybe he's more of a flashback story. But anyway, the episode's called Cause and Effect, and here's the description as per IMDb. I'm sure it'll shed some light on this.
I hope so.
Also, the rating's particularly high, so I'm intrigued.
Oh.
The Enterprise gets caught in a time loop, which always has one result: total destruction of the ship itself. Okay. I like time loops. Time loops are fun. Kelsey Grammer in what looks like to be a previous era of Star Trek,
Time loop. Yep. Yeah, no, I'm down.
A lot of good things, and I'm not going to lie, seeing that number on the IMDb rating makes me...
How high is the number?
9.0.
Oof. Okay, that's up there.
So, it's directed by one Jonathan Frakes. So,
well, we know at this point he definitely knows what he's doing behind the camera by this stage.
Oh yeah. He's
I know that's no secret now. Of course he does by now, but even back, by the time this episode was coming out, he was at a stage there where, okay, he tends to do some solid episodes.
Yeah, and even directs two of the movies coming up. So
exactly. Yeah.
So there you go, and he's still directing episodes of Discovery and Picard to this day. So he's got a little sweet gig out of the whole thing. But yeah, Cause and Effect, that's next time. So let us know what you thought of the Outcast in the comments below. Like and subscribe, all that stuff. Get us on the Twitters at mailed_fuzz for channel updates. If you want to support the show and the channel and everything we do here, you head over to patreon.com/mailfuzztv, and you can donate as little as $1 per month and get some bonuses for your troubles. But it helps keep all the content coming, so go and have a look and see if you're interested. Hit all the buttons on YouTube. All those things do help. But that is us, so thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching Star Trek, and somewhere out there, how did I tie it into this episode? Jeez. Somewhere out there, Wesley Crusher is